Welcome to the Paul Adefarasin podcast. We revisit the word, surface the big ideas, and give you space to reflect, pray, and act. If you'd like the full message, though, you can watch it on YouTube or listen on Spotify after this episode.
Usually, when we sit down to analyze a morning routine or, how to set up the day for success, the focus always lands on habits.
Right, like getting sunlight or reviewing your schedule, standard stuff.
Exactly. Or like optimizing a workflow. But imagine if every single word you spoke this morning was not just a passing sound wave.
Yeah.
Imagine if you viewed every syllable as a literal physical brick.
It's a wild thought, viewing language not as a descriptive tool, but as a constructive material. I mean, it completely changes the entire paradigm of how we interact with reality.
And that is the core mission for this deep dive. So we are looking at this advanced masterclass on communication and life architecture, pulling from a sermon titled The Power of the Mouth and the Life That It Creates, Part 2.
Delivered by Pastor Paul Adefarasin.
Yep, at House on the Rock in Lagos, back on June 21st, 2026. Now, we've touched on the broad strokes of this message before, but today we have an exclusive, detailed dive into the complete raw transcript of the live stream.
Which is so crucial because we're going to synthesize the foundational mechanics quickly and then spend the bulk of our time uncovering 5 highly advanced steps of communication that were previously omitted from our earlier analysis.
Yeah, point 6 through 10. But, we have to start with the foundation.
Oh, totally. Jumping straight into advanced communication tactics without establishing that internal architecture first. It's just a recipe for failure.
Right.
You literally cannot deploy high-level strategies if the internal reservoir driving them is contaminated.
So let's do a quick flyover of that foundation. The transcript anchors this whole thing in the concept of moving mountains, pulling from the biblical text of Mark 11.
But he immediately draws a hard boundary there.
He really does. This is not the modern popular interpretation of manifesting. It isn't some cosmic vending machine where you just visualize an outcome and it magically drops into your lap.
No, the defining metric here is alignment. Moving a mountain relies on aligning with a purpose that's, larger than personal gratification.
Which makes sense.
Right. And the source argues something quite profound about human ambition, actually. That a deep, persistent desire to solve a specific problem or build something new is actually evidence.
Wait, evidence of what?
It's proof that a solution has already been prepared. You're simply catching the scent of a reality that is ready to be constructed.
Oh, wow. I love that. And that structural build brings us to the concept of the reservoir. He references Luke 6.45. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks.
Yeah, the kitchen sink analogy.
Yes. Think of your mouth as nothing more than the tap at your kitchen sink. The heart, or, your internal subconscious, is the main reservoir up in the hills holding millions of gallons of water.
Which perfectly explains why forcing yourself to think positive often just collapses under pressure.
Because of the water quality.
Exactly. If that reservoir up in the hills is contaminated with heavy metals like unresolved trauma, deep-seated bitterness, chronic anxiety, it doesn't matter how shiny and new the kitchen faucet is. The second you're put under pressure and forced to turn that tap, toxic water is going to flood the room.
And to clean that water, the pastor uses this incredibly modern analogy. He compares our internal subconscious dialogue to an AI prompt.
It's an incredibly precise parallel for human psychology. I mean, generative models respond entirely to the caliber of the input.
Garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly. If you feed an AI a vague, victim-minded prompt like, why is my life always so hard? The system will literally just parse its database and output a list of generic reasons validating your struggle.
It gives you exactly what you asked for.
Yes.
Yeah.
But if you elevate the architecture of the prompt, asking a really sophisticated question about how to leverage a specific failure into a structural advantage, you pull down sophisticated, actionable wisdom. You are the architect of the prompt.
Which means a huge part of fixing that internal prompt is stopping the endless replay of your own trauma. There's this very memorable line in the transcript. Don't curse it, don't nurse it, don't rehearse it, disperse it.
Disperse it.
Yeah.
Because rehearsing pain is essentially practicing how to remain powerless.
Wow. Practicing how to remain powerless.
Yeah. And the antidote provided here is narrative. He points to ancient accounts, like Joseph being thrown into a pit or the 3 men cast into a fiery furnace.
Right. The psychological takeaway isn't about avoiding the pit.
No, not at all. It's realizing that the pit and the fire are merely midpoint plot developments. They are not the end of the story.
So once that internal narrative is dispersed and the reservoir is finally clean, you can actually begin creating tangible value. And the source structures human value creation into 4 distinct tiers.
Yeah, starting with implementation at the baseline, which is just manual labor and execution.
Then above that is unification, right?
Right, unification. That involves management and organizing the implementers. But the absolute highest levels of human leverage are imagination and communication.
And communication is positioned as the ultimate vehicle. It takes the invisible concepts that you constructed in your imagination and literally transports them into the physical world. And to master this vehicle, the transcript initially outlined 5 foundational tools for a communicator. The first 5 I asked.
Let's break those down mechanically. The first is inspiration, which it isn't about hype. It's actually defined as finding the exact intersection between what your audience desperately needs and the specific solution you possess.
Okay, got it.
The second is intriguing.
Wait, so being intriguing, does that mean figuring out how to be like the most fascinating person in the room?
Counterintuitively, no. It means stopping the performance of being interesting and instead becoming intensely, genuinely interested in the people you're speaking to.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, asking targeted questions about their reality rather than projecting your own.
Kind of like the difference between someone at a networking event who talks at you for 10 minutes straight about their own startup
versus the person who asks you a highly specific question about the friction in your industry.
Exactly. The latter leaves a much deeper impression.
Precisely the mechanic. So the third tool is invitational. This is the ability to break the fourth wall. Even if you're delivering a keynote to 1,000 people, the tone and cadence should mimic a one-on-one fireside chat. It lowers the audience's defensive filters.
Makes sense.
The fourth is informational, which just requires genuine, exhaustive mastery of your subject matter. And the fifth is inputs gathering the raw materials for your speech. The source calls these the 4 Ps. Principles, pictures, parables, and proof.
All right, so this brings us to the crucial pivot of this deep dive. Let's look at this from the perspective of someone listening right now. Let's say I've done the work.
Yep.
I've gathered my 4 Ps. My internal reservoir is completely clear of bitterness. I have mastered the subject matter. Why is it that when I step into the boardroom for a critical presentation or sit down for a high-stakes negotiation, my mind still goes completely blank and I freeze?
That's the real question, isn't it? And the answer is because gathering the data is merely the preparation phase. The transcript references this mentorship formula. Read yourself full, think yourself clear, pray yourself hot.
Okay.
Gathering inputs is just reading yourself full. The reason a speaker freezes under pressure is a lack of dynamic architecture. They're relying on a fragile script rather than a robust index.
And this shifts us entirely into the advanced, previously omitted mechanics from the source material. We're moving from gathering to structuring. Let's really unpack this concept of the index.
An index is a deeply internalized, modular repertoire of material. When someone types out a speech verbatim, they're creating this really rigid linear path. If they stumble, they fall off the path entirely.
Right.
An index, however, is a mental library. It catalogs the parables, the proofs, the frameworks, and the quotations we discussed earlier, tagging them for immediate retrieval based on the real-time needs of the room.
It's the exact difference between a classical musician and a jazz musician. Like, a classical musician trained strictly on sheet music can play a complex symphony perfectly.
Absolutely, perfectly.
But if a gust of wind blows that sheet music off the stand, or, I don't know, someone coughs loudly and they lose their place on the page, the performance stops entirely. Panic sets in.
Yeah, it all crumbles.
But a jazz musician doesn't operate on a rigid script. They have an index. They've deeply internalized their scales, a vast repertoire of riffs, and an understanding of chord progressions.
And because the jazz musician operates from an index, they can improvise effortlessly. I mean, if the rhythm section drops the tempo or the mood of the crowd suddenly shifts, the musician simply reaches into their index and pulls out a different riff that matches the new environment.
That's brilliant.
And the critical insight provided in the transcript is this. The notes you bring to a presentation are yours alone. The audience has no idea what you were supposed to say.
That fundamentally changes the pressure of public speaking.
It really does.
If you completely forget your third talking point, you don't freeze and stare at your notes. You reach into your mental index, pull out a relevant anecdote or a compelling piece of proof, and the audience assumes it was the master plan all along.
Right. The relief of that realization allows the communicator to actually stay present, but having a perfectly organized mental library won't save a presentation if the delivery of that material is fundamentally hollow.
What do you mean?
Well, you can have all the right words, but if the audience detects hesitation or like a lack of conviction, they will immediately tune out, which leads to the next advanced step, being impactful.
Ah, and the transcript defines being impactful in a very specific, almost mechanical way. It isn't about vocal projection or dynamic hand gestures. It is defined as the act of imparting faith.
Yes. The psychological mechanism at play here is fascinating. An audience, whether it's a congregation, a board of directors, or just a single client, often lacks the internal certainty to execute the solution you're proposing.
Yeah, they might not even believe in their own capacity to succeed.
Exactly. So being impactful means actively transmitting your absolute unshakable conviction into the minds of individuals who currently lack it.
So you're basically serving as a psychological scaffold for them. You let them borrow your certainty until they can generate it for themselves.
That's exactly it.
The pastor shares this incredibly raw, personal story to illustrate this. He details how, as a young man, he was widely considered a completely hopeless case. Like, his behavior was so erratic that his own father wanted to throw him out of the house.
Wow.
Yeah. But his mother possessed this unwavering, almost irrational belief in his potential.
And her faith in him wasn't passive, right? It was active and imparted. Because she held that vision with absolute certainty, her belief became the structural foundation that allowed him to eventually construct his own self-belief. He literally borrowed her psychological architecture until he could build his own.
Which is amazing. And translating that to a secular or corporate environment redefines leadership entirely.
Oh,
Often, leaders think their job is to stand at the front of the room and sound so impressive that the team thinks, wow, our boss is incredible.
okay.
But true impact operates in reverse.
It's about the listener.
Exactly. You speak with such conviction that the listener walks away thinking, wow, I am incredible. We can actually pull this off. You loan out your certainty that a crisis can be averted or a complex project can be shipped.
But faith and conviction, no matter how strongly imparted, eventually require an anchor in reality. I mean, if you ask an audience to stand on the scaffolding of your belief, you must quickly follow up with concrete evidence that this belief system functions in the real world.
Right, which moves the progression to the next step. Illustrations.
Yes. An illustration is the living proof. It's taking the theoretical engine you just described and showing the audience a car driving down the highway at 100 miles an hour.
I love that.
And the sermon provides two striking examples of this living proof. The first example centers on his own wife. The transcript describes her as a living epistle, like a walking, breathing letter of proof.
Okay, an epistle.
Yeah. She didn't originally intend to be a public speaker or a preacher, but the community actively poured their belief into her. They imparted faith, providing that psychological scaffolding we just discussed.
And she stepped up.
She eventually stepped into the role, and the transcript notes that she now communicates with such overwhelming power that it literally forces others to sit up and take notice.
The transformation itself is the illustration.
Exactly.
But the second example is what bridges this entire philosophy directly into the secular marketplace.
Right?
The pastor talks about a woman from his congregation who internalized these exact communication mechanics.
Right.
She cleaned her internal script, indexed her professional knowledge, and learned to focus intensely on her audience's friction points. And then she walked into a massive presentation at a top-tier national financial institution.
She applied the architecture perfectly. And the outcome wasn't just a polite round of applause or, a standard follow-up email. The CEO of the financial institution was so moved by the clarity and conviction of her presentation that he physically high-fived her during the meeting.
A high five from the CEO, which proves these aren't just motivational concepts meant to stay inside a building on a Sunday morning. They are universal laws of human connection.
Absolutely.
When you structure your communication properly and combine it with a genuine interest in the success of the person across the table, it translates flawlessly into any corporate environment.
So you've organized the mental index, successfully imparted your conviction, and anchored it with undeniable living proof. The final two steps of the framework address the ultimate goal of communication.
Which is what?
Altering the environment and ensuring the change is sustainable. These are invocation and inculcation.
Let's tackle invocation first. The concept here is about bringing a new reality into active life within the room. It involves speaking boldly to disrupt and rewrite the operating system of the space you occupy.
It's powerful stuff.
The source points to the biblical narrative of the flood in Noah's time as an analogy for breaking down an old, corrupt system to clear the ground for a completely new one. But, okay, here's my question.
Sure.
I understand the theory of casting a vision, but how do you actually execute an invocation in a standard corporate Q3 review without sounding completely out of touch with reality?
That's a fair point.
Like, if a listener walks into a Tuesday morning marketing meeting and starts prophesying a new reality, there can get some very strange looks.
It is a vital distinction, and the pastor actually addresses this exact friction point in the transcript. The instruction he gives is brilliant in its pragmatism. He says you must use banking language in a bank.
Oh.
Yeah, you do not use theological terminology, churchese, or overly mystical vocabulary when you're standing in a corporate boardroom.
So you translate the underlying principle into the native tongue of your environment.
Exactly. You invoke a new reality by casting a compelling vision using the metrics, KPIs, and vocabulary that the specific room respects. You aren't merely reporting data from the last quarter, you're utilizing your index and your illustrations to declare a definitive new direction.
Right.
You speak with such grounded authority that the atmosphere in the room physically shifts to align with the blueprint you're presenting. You are invoking a pivot.
The force of intent behind the words is what changes the room, not the religious wrapping paper. Banking language in a bank is a framework you can apply anywhere. Medical language in a hospital, engineering language on a job site.
Which brings us to the final piece of the architecture, inculcation. This acknowledges a fundamental limitation of human cognition.
Which is?
You cannot teach an audience everything they need to know in a single sitting. Attempting to do so simply overwhelms their processing capacity.
Right, if you dump the entire reservoir on them at once, they drown.
Exactly. So inculcation is the strategic process of instilling a deep, persistent hunger in the listener to continue learning on their own. It involves generously sharing the sources of your own architecture.
Oh, I see.
You share the specific books that shifted your mindset, the frameworks you apply daily, the podcasts that challenge you. You're intentionally leaving a trail of breadcrumbs so the audience continues to transform long after your presentation has ended.
It's the ultimate shift from feeding an audience a single meal to teaching them the mechanics of farming. You want them leaving the room curious and hungry rather than overstuffed and fatigued.
Spot on.
When you string all of these advanced mechanics together, moving from a dynamic mental index to imparting faith, providing living illustrations, invoking a new operating system, and finally, inculcating a desire for further growth, you cease to be a simple public speaker.
You step into the role of an architect. You're no longer describing the world to people. You're actively constructing a new one for them to inhabit.
Which brings this entire deep dive back to you, the listener. We have covered a massive amount of psychological and structural ground today. Becoming a master architect of your own life and career demands that you start at the absolute source.
The reservoir.
Yes, you have to evaluate the water in your internal reservoir. You must stop rehearsing past trauma and allowing unresolved grievances to poison your internal prompts.
And once the internal narrative is clear, the external mechanics can be deployed. You stop trying to perform and become intensely interested in the friction points of others.
You build a deeply internalized mental index, so the fear of freezing under pressure vanishes.
You loan out your absolute certainty to those who are wavering, anchor that faith with tangible proof, and actively shift the operating system of your environment using the native language of the room.
The most sobering realization of this entire framework is looking around at your current reality, the environment you are operating in right now, your current stress levels, the ceiling of your career, the depth of your relationships. That entire structure was built brick by the words you chose to speak.
And the words you allowed others to speak over you during the last few years.
Right. The past is completely set in stone. The structure is built.
But the architecture of tomorrow is entirely pliable. It is waiting for the vocabulary you decide to deploy today.
Think about this thought experiment as we wrap up. Imagine if every single sentence you speak over the next 24 hours was instantly drafted into a legally binding contract with your future self.
Oh, wow.
How many of those contracts would you refuse to sign? How many times a day do you catch yourself saying, this is impossible, or I'm never going to get this right, or the market is just too terrible right now?
Yeah, that happens a lot.
Every time you vocalize those thoughts, you are signing a lease on a reality you actively do not want to live in. Take a hard, critical look at the blueprints you are drawing up with your casual conversations today. Are you building a bridge to the exact outcome you desire, or are you laying the bricks for a wall right across your own path? The future is waiting for your instructions.
Thank you for listening. To go deeper, watch the full message on YouTube or listen to the full-length sermon on Spotify. Follow the podcast, and please share it with someone who needs it and leave your response in the Q&A. Kindly keep your heart on fire, your eyes on Jesus, knowing you are the exception. Grace and peace. We love you deeply.